Hi guys, in this video we're going to be learning to code by writing a simple fun game. So if you're new to programming or maybe you've never programmed before, this is the video for you. The language that we're going to be using for this tutorial is called Python. Python is one of the most popular programming languages in the world, and it's also one of the simplest to learn and write. So if you want to get a job, if you just want to learn to code for fun, I think this video is going to be hugely beneficial to you. So let's get into it. So the first thing you need to do is download Python. That's very simple. Just go to python.org/downloads and click the download Python button right here. Once you've downloaded it, you're going to have to install it in the standard way. The next thing you're going to need is something to actually write your Python code in, because this is going to allow you to run Python code, and you also need something to write your Python code. And the most popular thing to do that at the moment is Visual Studio Code. So if you go to code.visualstudio.com and press the download button, and again install that in the normal way. This is a very professional level IDE, so if you learn this, you'll never have to upgrade, you'll never have to learn something new. This is going to give you everything you need to become a professional Python developer. Okay, so once you've installed Visual Studio Code and you've opened it, you'll see something like this. Now, the only thing you need to do to get Python working is to click on this extensions button over here on the left-hand side and search for Python. You're going to see at the top, there'll be something called Python, and then there'll be a button here to install it. I've already installed it, so I don't have that install button, but you'll see it right there. So once you've installed that, that's all you need to do to start developing Python. So in your Visual Studio, click File at the top, click Open Folder, then create yourself a folder. I've already created a folder here, and then click Open. Now we need to, so we've created a folder to keep our source code files in. Now we need to create a file to actually write our code in. But before we do that, let's just talk about what is code. Now code is essentially, a computer cannot understand English, or at least it can't understand it well enough to actually be able to interpret it in a logical way. So we need to write code, and that's something that the computer can understand, and it can run that, and then it can do something that we want. So we're going to type Python code into a text editor. We're then going to give that text file to Python, and it's going to go through step by step and run the code that we've written. So we're going to create a simple game. It's going to be a guessing game. So let's create a file called guessing game, and the extension for a Python file is called .py. To create that file, I just press this button here, which is new file right there. And then we can see our new file. Okay, so in this file, I can write lines of code. I can write something like A equals 2. Print A. And then I can go run, start debugging. And then I'm going to choose the Python developer, Python debugger, and then choose Python file. And you can see that ran, and the result is printed down here, which is 2. So this is some Python code. What does this Python code do? So this thing here is called a variable. And a variable basically just contains something. Like in this instance, it contains an integer with a value of 2. But it could also contain a string, which could be like this. And then I'll run the program again, run start debugging. And you can see instead of printing 2, it printed hello. This is called a function. This is the name of the function, and this is what you're going to give to the function when you call the function. So this function prints out a bit of text or a variable. It basically prints out anything you give it. And in this case, we've given it the variable A, and the contents of the variable a has hello. So it's going to print hello, and that's exactly what we saw down here. It printed hello. So this is variables in Python. The next thing I want to teach you about is something called if statements or conditional statements. So an if statement has essentially two parts. We start by saying if, then we're going to write something called a condition. And this condition is going to evaluate to either true or false. So if we had something like 1 is equal, this double equal sign means is equal to 1. So this here, 1 is equal to 1, so the result of this will be true. And the if statement, if the result here is true, it will run this bit of code here. So we have a colon on the end of this if statement to say do this, and then we have to indent by 1 there. It's very important because in Python, indents, i.e. a tab, is how we define code blocks. So it's very important. If we don't put this indent here, then Python won't, our program won't work correctly. So we can say if 1 equals 1, then we can write some code like print, we'll print true, because this statement here evaluated to true. So let's run that and see what we get. So I'm going to save the file, I'm going to go run, I'm going to run without the debugger. And you can see that the result is true because 1 is equal to 1. We can also add an else statement to if statements, like this. So we type else, and then we type a bit of code to run if this is not true. So we'll put in here false. Now if we change this to 1 is equal to 2, and run the program again, we can see that this prints false. So if this is true, this bit of code runs. If this is false, this bit of code runs. So really quite simple. So the next thing I want to show you guys is called a while loop. Now there are different types of loops in Python, but a while loop is probably the simplest. And we use a loop when we want to repeat some code over and over again. So the format of the while loop, you type while, then you type an expression. So it's a bit similar to our if statement. So the loop is going to go round and round while this expression is true. So let's start off by creating a variable called x, and we'll set that variable to 0. We'll then say while the variable x is smaller to 5, and then we put our colon and our indent. Now the code I type here is going to keep repeating while this is true. So let's simply just print out our variable x. So there's a problem with this code. It's going to go round and round and round, but x never changes. So x will always be 0, so it's just going to go around forever. So what do we need to do? We need to add 1 to x each time we go around this loop. So we could say x equals x plus 1. Therefore, it will go around when x is 0, then 1, then 2, then 3, then 4, and it will exit. But Python actually has a shorthand way of doing this. You can say x plus equals 1. And that's going to do the same thing and just add 1 to x. So let's run this and see if we get what we expect. And we do, we get 1, 2, 3, 4. Because we've said x is smaller than 5. So as soon as x becomes 5, this won't run this and it will quit out. So that's a while loop. So that's actually everything we need to write our game. So let's crack on and start coding our game. So the first thing we want to do in our game is print the user some instructions. So print, can you guess my number between 1 and 10? Okay, so we're going to ask the user to guess the number. But we're not going to just let them have one guess, because it wouldn't be a very fun game. We're going to be nice, and we're going to let the user have multiple turns, multiple tries. So we said that when we want to repeat a bit of code over and over again, we use a loop. So let's put a while loop, and we'll just say while, and then we'll say true. So we said that the while loop will keep repeating until this expression becomes true. So this while loop will just repeat forever, while true. So what do we want to do now? So we want to ask the user to enter their guess. So we'll use the print function, and we'll say enter your guess. Then we can use another Python function called input. And input returns a string, we can see str here, that the user has typed into the command line. So we're going to say their guess equals input. But the thing is, this input is a string, but we don't really want a string, we want an integer. So we can use a function called int to convert the return value of this input function and convert it into an int. It will then be stored in this variable called their guess. So we've got their guess, but what about my guess? We need to generate my guess. So we need to create a random number between 1 and 10. So to do this, we need to use a function called, we need to use an import statement. So we're going to type import random. So what does this do? Well, Python has a lot of different packages that you can import and use in your program. So some things are already imported automatically, and other things that you need to import manually. So this input function and this print function, these are already imported into Python as standard. But there isn't a random function. There isn't a function that can give me a random number in Python automatically, so I need to import the random module of Python. So here, we're going to say my guess equals random dot. So the random is the module, and then the function is going to be rand_int, which stands for random integer. And this will be, random integer takes two parameters. It takes the lowest value and the highest value, and it will generate a random integer in between those numbers and including those numbers. So we'll say 1 and 10. So we've got my guess and we've got their guess. So now we need to check to see if their guess is correct. So what do we use? We can use an if statement. So we say if my guess is the same, is equal to their guess, then we want to say print, what do we want to do? Say well done, because they've got their number right. Well done. So when they get the number right, we don't want to keep asking them again and again for the number. So what do we want to do? We want to exit the program. So in order to do that, we want to type break. Now break means break out of the loop that we're currently in. So we're in this while loop here, and this break here will exit this while loop. And because there'll be no more code to run after here, then it will actually exit the program. So I think this should work, but it's a bit of a tedious game because they have to keep typing a number over and over again. So let's make it a little bit more interesting and give them a hint. So let's say if their guess is greater than my guess, let's tell them it's too high. Now let's repeat this code again, copy paste. Too low. So if their guess is greater than my guess, I'm going to tell them it's too high. If their guess is smaller than my guess, I'm going to say it's too low. And let's start and see what we get. So, can you guess a number between 1 and 10? Enter your guess. Let's go for 5. 5 is too high. 3. Too high. 1. Too low. Okay, must be 2. Well done. And the game exited. So that's our first ever little Python game. Not the most exciting game in the world, but we did learn a lot of important things about Python, like if statements, while loops. This is all like fundamental stuff. This is kind of like the nuts and bolts of programming. If you can master these things, then you're going to be a good programmer. So it's really it's a good exercise to master the basics. So thanks for watching. Please let me know any comments you have. Did I talk too fast, too slow? Did I explain things clear enough? I'd love to hear your feedback. My goal is really just to be a good Python educator and grow the channel, so any help you could give me would be greatly appreciated. So thanks again for watching, guys. Hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and I'll see you again in the next episode. Cheers.